There were bright flashes of red in the sky. It's as if someone was waving around a flare light from space, faint but noticeable. We all made UFO jokes and laughed as we nailed our tents into the ground. I knew for sure that there were 5 of us. We have all been friends since early middle school and were celebrating our high school graduation with this getaway camping trip. The flashes of red must have stopped randomly as we made conversation while fixing up our tents. Dave managed to put his tent together the fastest and told us he was going to find some branches for the fire. I remember how he had worked with me at the local gas station last year. We used to do the night shift together and it had made working at a desolate gas station much more fun than it was supposed to be. There was also Eric in the corner still reading his tent manual, fidgeting with his signature round glasses. I wasn't as close with Eric as I was with the others, but I still remember sitting with him in math class and copying his homework one time. Ava was also there talking with Sally, my cousin. Both had decided to team up and work on one tent at a time. I also have clear memories of them hanging around at school in our usual places. In fact, I even knew Ava's younger brother as he used to beg to go with us wherever we went. I bring all this up because I'm sure that there were 5 of us including me and that I knew everyone in the group. So Dave had went to get some branches as we pulled out some foldable chairs and set them up around the fire pit. I remember feeling uneasy as the sun set and darkness began to consume the forest. The shadows of trees elongated around us as the minutes ticked by. Eric went to get a flashlight from his bag while we wondered what was taking Dave so long. He appeared soon after, the harsh rustling sounds of the bushes signifying his return. We were all buried in our chairs at this point, covered by our jackets. The temperature had dropped quickly and a slight breeze was beginning to pick up. "Geez, you guys weren't even bothered to pull out a chair for me," Dave said as he arranged all the branches in the pit. We had set up 5 chairs around the fire. I tried to rationalize the situation, but no matter how hard I focused, my head felt like it was underwater. I had perfect clarity up until that moment, but when I tried to focus on why 5 chairs were occupied when Dave hadn't sat down yet, my head seemed to just stop working as if something was reaching in and pulling out my thoughts. Instinctually, I felt even more uneasy now, and I had placed why. I looked around at the faces of the others and could tell that they had felt the same. Eric was fidgeting with his fingers, trying to scan around the group and spot the extra person, but it was futile. I scanned every face, each etched in worry and frowning in frustration except for. "It's all right, I'll get the chair myself," Dave said, breaking the silence and somewhat alleviating the tension. I got up and offered to help him. He looked into my eyes and nodded knowingly. We headed away from the fire pit towards the tents, but I kept my eyes glued on our group. "How many people are here?" I whispered to Dave as he looked around and realized that we had indeed only packed 5 chairs. In fact, every person had brought with them their own chair. They were heavy to carry and we wouldn't bring any extra needlessly. "There's 5, right?" "I mean, there's 5 chairs," Dave replied. His voice wavered as he spoke. "No, I just think maybe one of us forgot our chair," I said. My mind was struggling to address the issue head-on and now sought to find rational excuses instead. I didn't quite feel in control of my thoughts. It felt like swimming in a dream, and if I tried to force myself to think about who the 6th person was, my head would begin to throb. "Yeah, that sounds about right actually," Dave said, relaxing and heading back to the group. When we walked back to the fire pit and circle of chairs, 2 chairs were empty. One for me and one for Dave. Everything was adding up now, even though we all agreed it wasn't before. Sally suggested we were all probably tired after the long hike to get here and probably just needed some sleep. She could have been right. We were all sleep deprived from waking up very early today to make it on time. Ava brought out the drinks. The whole 6-pack was emptied. We all moved closer to the crackling fire for warmth as we took sips from our cans and reminisced on memories of last year. Ava was in the middle of telling us about that one time she was home alone with weird things happening in her house when I got these sudden chills despite the pleasant warmth of the fire. What felt cozy and safe moments ago felt wrong now, all because I realized that there was a crucial detail I missed. "Who started the fire?" I asked, completely interrupting Ava in the middle of her story and breaking everyone else's immersion. Everyone looked momentarily annoyed until they realized they had no answer. Once again I scanned the faces staring back at me. All barely illuminated by the light from the fire. All familiar and pale from fear.
Was it you, Dave? Eric asked. Dave shook his head.
I think the person standing behind Jenny did it, Sally said, looking over at me. I whipped my head around so quickly it hurt. My heart was pounding in my ears. There was nothing behind me except for the encompassing darkness of the woods. Staring at those tall dark trees behind me made me feel exposed. I felt like a lost bird in a vast field. Wait, I don't know, Sally said. Her eyes had gone wide and she was shaking visibly. She continued to look around frantically as Ava moved over to her, placing her hands on her shoulders and trying to calm her down.
I think we should leave this place, Ava stuttered.
Yeah, something just doesn't feel right, but I can't put my finger on it, Dave said. But it's so dark out in the forest now, we'd probably get lost if we leave now, someone else said. Yeah, I think we should stay the night and leave as soon as we can tomorrow, Eric agreed. I tried to protest but realized Eric was right. The woods harbored an oppressive darkness within which navigation would be near impossible. Let's not sleep in our separate tents just to be safe, Sally said. We all agreed. We only brought one-person tents with us, but we could squeeze two if we tried.
That way no one would be alone at night.
Following this conversation we all got up and made our pairs. I went with Dave and Sally like always went with Ava. Eric kept complaining that he didn't have a pair, but we reassured him he did. He wouldn't accept it. I feel like at some point we all realized that there were only 5 of us and suddenly we were all huddling up in the middle of the clearing. Why do we keep thinking there are 6 of us here? Eric asked. Sweat was dripping down his face despite the cold. We had nearly left him all alone on his own under the assumption that there was another person. My stomach turned as I squeezed my eyes shut and tried to mentally recap everyone here. My head throbbed, but I kept pushing it. There's me, Dave, Eric, Ava, Sally, and... I was pointing at each of them as I said the name. I retched and emptied the contents of my stomach on the ground when I got past Sally. The left side of my head felt like there was a knife stuck in it. My vision was blurry. Dave held me up to stop me from collapsing and we all wordlessly started to move towards the tents as someone put the fire out. Dave helped me into a tent while the 4 outside discussed what to do. I could only focus on snippets of the conversation as the excruciating pain beating against my skull came and went in waves. Sally had the brilliant idea of arranging 3 tents together so their openings faced together at right angles in a sort of U shape so we could sleep as close as possible and also limit the entrance to our tents. Dave was about to go to help as they worked outside, but I clutched his hand and asked him to stay with me. The tents took some time to arrange. I started to feel a bit better once everyone got settled into their tents. A quick head count confirmed there were 5 of us. Eric would have to sleep in his tent alone, but he was more comfortable with it since all the tents were very close now. Looking back now, I think he was just trying to put a brave face on for us. I regret that moment deeply, letting him sleep in his tent alone. He was always less integrated in our group and knew that none of us would pair with him. Just before going to bed, we all agreed to leave as soon as the sun rose in the morning. I remember taking one last look outside the tent into the forest before trying to fall asleep. The wind had picked up and the tree branches were swaying gently. Beyond our clearing was just pure darkness. It felt like the trees were closing in on me. With the faint moonlight illuminating our clearing, I turned my head to look over at the 2 tents we had left out and saw someone standing next to them. Ava's shrill scream woke me up in the middle of the night. Dave and I ripped our tent door open to find Sally and Ava looking into Eric's tent. We pushed them aside. Eric's sleeping bag was rolled up. He was still inside it. His head in the center, face contorted in utter agony. The rest of his body rolled around it with the blue fabric now dripping with dark blood. Dave zipped up the door of the tent. Ava was in shock. Her eyes had become glassy and unfocused. Sally was shaking her repeatedly, tears streaming down her face. Dave picked up his torch and yelled at us to get up and run. We left the campsite behind and entered the trail we had come from. The five of us huddled together, Dave leading in the front as he cast his weak flashlight over the path so we could see it. All we had to help us get through this 2-hour trail was a small white circle of light. Even the moon failed to illuminate our surroundings through the dense foliage. Ava tripped and fell, twisting her ankle. We came to a stop. Someone said they knew how to splint it so we could keep going. They dragged her into the woods instead. It happened too quickly for any of us to process. Sally was about to run after Ava when Dave held her back. She struggled and managed to free herself, running into the trees to follow the echoes of Ava's screams. I was about to run after her, but Dave held me by the shoulders and shook me hard.
We need to get out of here, Jenny. Please, he said.
I hesitated but jolted into motion again when Sally's voice was cut off abruptly. She had been calling out Ava's name as she ran after her. Dave and I continued to run down the trail, trying to get to our car so we could get out of here. There was nothing we could do. At some point there were 3 of us running on the trail, Dave and I shoulder to shoulder, while someone followed us closely behind. "Dave, who's behind us?" I gasped. My heart was threatening to burst through my ribcage and my legs burned. He turned to look at me. Confusion transformed into fear on his face and then into rage. "You keep running," he told me as he produced a pocket knife from his pants. He handed me the car keys, which I nearly dropped. Then he turned around suddenly and jumped at whoever was behind us. I continued to run in fear as the sounds of a struggle grew behind me. I tripped and tumbled through the trail for what felt like hours. I didn't allow myself to stop. I almost cried when the trail ended and I walked out into the familiar car park. Not wasting a second, I ran to the car and started it up, accelerating out of that forest and onto the highway within mere seconds. I'm typing this post out at a rest stop. My phone has finally regained service and I've called 911 to try and explain the situation. I don't think they believe my version of events, but they sent a car my way regardless. As I wait, the sun is finally starting to rise. After I hit the post button on this, I'm gonna check why the person in my back seat has been so silent the whole time.
I was tasked with babysitting for my neighbor's kid, but she has sent me an extremely weird message on WhatsApp. Please feed Mohan his dog food, pedigree, at 2 p.m. The packet is in the cupboard and his dog bowl is kept near the kitchen sink. I stared at the WhatsApp message, reading it again and again. My emotions were caught between bemusement and nervousness at the bizarre request. I know what you all are thinking. Just feed the damn dog his kibble. But here are the facts. Mohan is not a dog. He is a 10-year-old. To give you all some context upon my situation, I had agreed to babysit Mrs. Sharma's son Mohan because my mother wanted our new kooky neighbor to feel at home. And no, this was not a paid babysitting job. It was just an endeavor to build neighborly relations by my overenthusiastic mother. But as I said just now, Mrs. Sharma was a kooky. I had only observed her twice, but both the moments left quite an impression upon me. The first one happened when I caught her cutting a bar of soap like a carrot upon my mother's chopping board. She had brought a pack of those as gifts when she first came to visit us, a brand new pack of expensive sandal soaps. At that time, I was reading a book from a position where she could not see me, but I could see her on the sofa chatting with my mother. But when my mother went to the terrace to fetch our drying clothes for 10 minutes, I surreptitiously watched her take one of the bars and start dicing it upon the chopping board my mother had just used for slicing radishes. I looked away after 5 minutes, but Mrs. Sharma had clearly left no trace of her actions because when my mother came back, they continued their nonsensical conversations while my mother once again picked up her knife and continued chopping the remaining vegetables. Needless to say, I refused to eat dinner that night and ordered from Zomato. The second incident happened when I caught Mrs. Sharma tasting Pedigree, a popular brand of dog food, when my mother and I were visiting her home. Mrs. Sharma went into her kitchen to pour some drinks and snacks for us while we were waiting in her guest room. At that time, I had a sudden urge to use the washroom. I silently walked past the kitchen, but my eyes happened to glance upon her for a few seconds. And there she was, taking kibbles out of a pedigree packet and putting them in her mouth. I refused to eat anything she served to me and my mom later on. I also mentally grimaced every time my mom picked a bite to eat. The woman clearly had issues, and I wished that my mom would have stayed clear of her. But fate had other plans. The two had become fast friends, and now I was saddled with babysitting Mrs. Sharma's 10-year-old son Mohan. When I had questioned my mother about why we didn't see Mohan during our visit to Mrs. Sharma's house, Mom told me that it was because he had gone on a walk with a girl from our colony. My mom also gave me a list of written instructions on how to take care of that kid. I wished she would just WhatsApp me, but she just had to write it on paper in her terrible handwriting. Honestly, the only redeeming quality of Mrs. Sharma so far was that she was not as technophobic as my mother and had agreed to message me the instructions. The babysitting ordeal was to last from 12 noon till 6 in the evening. I had not even glanced upon the list my mother had given me, as Mrs. Sharma had promised me that she would text me the relevant tasks throughout the day. So, with an irritated look upon my face, I went to pursue the challenge. I first saw Mohan in the living room of their house, watching television. An episode of Doraemon blared from the television and I winced at how loud it was, but the kid was unaffected. Mrs. Sharma had just deposited the keys to her house with me right outside the house and left in a hurry, without even introducing me to her kid. Her craziness clearly wasn't going away anytime soon. I felt sorry for the kid for having such a weird mother without even having met him. So that is how I had relaxed a little and entered their living room after safely locking the door. I was told by my mother that Mohan was 10 years old, and he looked exactly like a normal 10-year-old would. He was watching the television screen with his black hair combed back, wearing a red t-shirt and a pair of comfortable pants, munching upon Maggi noodles with a glass of mango juice nearby. I introduced myself to him and he monotonously replied to my basic questions, his attention clearly fixed upon the television. But he looked comfortable enough, so I went into the guest bedroom of the house to watch Dairy Girls on Netflix after reassuring him to call me if he needs anything. I was captivated by the show until Mrs. Sharma's message notification came on WhatsApp. That is when the weird message that I had talked about earlier came in at 1:40 p.m. And reading the message made me wish that there was some version of CPS in India, because the entire event just screamed that something abusive was going on with Mohan and his mother. I wondered if Mrs. Sharma was joking with me, so I nervously went to the cupboard to see if I would actually find dog food over there. I was hoping that the last time I saw her eat pedigree kibbles in her kitchen was just some hallucination or glitch in the Matrix moment. But there it was, a yellow packet with a cute little golden retriever picture, a big packet of pedigree. I stared at it for a good 10 minutes, wondering what my next steps should be. Should I make a run for it and inform my mother about the incident, or should I grab Mohan along with me too? Or should I just ignore my conscience and feed him the dog food and finish my babysitting task? Because if the past events were anything to go by, it certainly would not be the first time he would be eating it. My mind was racing in all directions until suddenly, I heard scratching at one of the bedroom doors nearby. To say that my blood had turned to ice by now would be an understatement. I quickly ran to Mohan and asked him what was causing the scratching. Maybe it was just a pet that Mrs. Sharma had confused with Mohan, I thought nervously. But Mohan's reply caught me off guard.
It is the headman, he told me. What? Dash ignore him and don't open that door.
After giving that vague answer, he went back to watching some cartoon. I was beyond scared by this point and just wanted to bolt out of the house. But one question still lingered in my mind.
Does your mother feed you pedigree e asked him cautiously? Mon looked at me for a few seconds and nodded yes.
I sucked in a breath and hurriedly told him to come with me to my house. He had clearly been abused and was under some delusion of the red man. I could not in good conscience leave the kid here with that crazy witch. So, I just grabbed his arm and started dragging him with me. I frantically reassured him that we would call the police on his mother and he would be safe from her. But he quietly told me that there was no point to that. That made me pause in my tracks. I looked over my shoulder to see that he had suddenly become hunched over and was shaking with tears. That woman is not my mother. My mother was killed 2 years ago. The red man had killed her. And if you try to complain about it, it will kill you. What the hell are you talking about? I screamed at the kid, my mind spinning. It is true. It used to be just me and my mom, the real Radhika Sharma. She used to be normal. But one weird rule existed in our house. Mom had forbidden me from going to the guest room of my house, claiming that a ghost lives there and we should be wary of him. I used to be extremely afraid of that threat because I could sometimes hear scratching sounds from behind that locked door. One night, when I went to get water, I saw her standing outside the door to that room with a very frightened look on her face. I saw it. A red hand had suddenly emerged from the door and grabbed her inside. I ran back to my room and hid under the covers the entire night. I was sobbing throughout the night and was terrified. Terrified that my mother had been killed. Terrified that the red man exists and that he would come after me. He never came out. The next day, my mother came to wake me up. I was scared but happy to see her. But that morning, for breakfast, she served me the pedigree that used to feed our dog at that time. Her eccentric behavior did not end there. She would always take baths with a mixture of milk and oil. She would sleep on the roof of our car with her eyes open. She would twist her neck at odd angles pretty often, and she would also cut up slices of soap to feed our dog. Our dog, he died soon because of that. I stared at Mohan with a numb feeling. He continued his rambles. I knew then that thing was not my mother. That my mommy was dead. And I also knew that whatever that thing is, it was trying to imitate humans. It has gotten rather good at it over 2 years. We moved a lot during that time. It will always chat up the new neighbors, trying to appear more and more normal. I knew it was some weird creature. But I also knew that it was not the red man, because no matter where we moved, there would always be one of our rooms that would be locked and off limits to me. And I could hear scratching behind it. He finally finished his story while sobbing throughout. I just kept on standing there, feeling like an icy hand had gripped my heart. I was not afraid for the kid. I knew he would survive somehow. I was afraid for myself, knowing that I had basically entered a haunted house. Mohan had escaped my grasp and ran upstairs, probably to cry to himself some more. But I knew that if I didn't get out of the house that second, my legs would give out and I would not escape alive. I was about to make a run for it when I heard a tire screech in the background. Mrs. Sharma, or more pointedly, the thing imitating her, was home. I just stood there frozen like a statue when the lock turned. The thing must have had a spare key, of course. And within moments, it opened the door and entered the house with a cheery face. "Hello, dear. How was your day? I am sorry I came home early. The grocery shop I like was closed today and I was free to come home early. I hope you had fun with Mohan. He is very friendly." The thing grinned at me.
E deste estar é in silence, note a movimental off-me.
It moved towards the room from where the scratching sounds were coming from, still chatting me up. I hope Mohan ate his food properly. He generally is a good boy. But I had to discipline him for a very long time for him to reach that stage when it comes to food. I watched in silent horror as it came to stand before the door with the scratching sounds. But a confused expression came upon his face.
Daddy, did you not let Mo out of the room?
The inquisitive expression just escaped my mouth, the first prickle of curiosity coming over me. Without any warning, its hands turned the handle and opened the door. I screamed and tried to make a run for it, until I heard a bark from behind me. I just froze upon the spot, slowly turning my head around. I expected to see a grotesque red figure with a creepy smile coming at me with inhuman speed.
Instead, a happy golden retriever ran up to me.
I tried to collect my thoughts for a minute. I expected that this was all a show, and both the woman and dog would soon reveal their true, paranormal forms. But nothing of that sort happened. The golden happily continued to hug me, and Mrs. Sharma watched with a worried look on her face. "Did you not feed him, dearie? Mohan must be very hungry now." Mrs. Sharma replied, pointing to the dog.
What are you talking about? Mo is your son, Sinister?
I refer to him as my son. But he is not my actual son, dearie. He is a dog. Why are you asking such a weird question?
Bate.
Were you confused all this time because you thought I had an actual son? I never had a child, and I had never been married. I have only had one companion for 10 years, my beloved Mohan. Let me feed him now. He must be hungry.
Oui, fidete, chivalque tovardes de kitchen.
I just excused myself and ran to my home. I ambushed my mother as soon as I saw her. Did you know that Mohan was a dog? I angrily questioned my mother. Of course. Why are you asking such an idiotic question? Was that not clear enough the first time you saw him? Mohan being a dog was literally the first thing I wrote in my list, but you did not read it. My mother chided me. I was at a complete loss of words. If Mohan was a dog, then who the hell was the boy I had talked to? Wanting more answers, I started narrating Mrs. Sharma's past actions to my mother. I told her about Mrs. Sharma's weird soap chopping and pedigree eating behaviors from earlier. I expected her to be shocked at this, but she only laughed. She was chopping the soap because I had asked her to do that, silly. I had wanted to take those pieces of soap to keep them in our potted plants. I had read somewhere that they repel insects and wanted to check for myself. And as far as the pedigree eating is concerned, she did not eat it. She told me that she puts a few pieces in her mouth to encourage Mohan to eat it. She sometimes does it even when he is not there out of absent-mindedness. You may think it is weird, but the tactic has been quite effective so far. With that, my mother started walking towards the dining table, still speaking. You have really disappointed me this time. I expected you would take better care of Mohan. You are lucky Mrs. Sharma is a sweet lady. She would probably forgive you. Mrs. Sharma had even brought a gift for you for taking care of Mohan. My mother kept on ranting. My mother pointed towards a painting kept on the dining table. But as soon as I saw it, beads of sweat started collecting on my forehead, and I felt like I would faint. Because the painting consisted of a picture of the same boy I had talked to earlier that day. And on the bottom right corner, it was signed as the Red Man. Since then, I have tried to throw out the painting multiple times. But it keeps on showing up in weird places in my house. So, all I am requesting you guys is that, if you ever end up babysitting a kid talking about the Red Man, just call an exorcist.